If you think racism is a thing of the past now that we have our first black president, think again. The summer of 2009 has seen its share of race-related controversies. There was the so-called whites-only pool controversy, where a group of minority campers alleged they were denied access to a community pool because of their race, an allegation the pool continues to deny. Then there was the discovery of a controversial website. It was called domelights.com, and it was geared for cops and firefighters and run by a white police officer. On it, some horrific racist postings. It has now been shut down. And then there was the arrest of Harvard professor Henry Gates by a white police officer. Gates says it was race-inspired, but the officer says it was by the book. They've agreed to disagree. Are these examples of racism prevailing in our society, or has it become too easy to label everything racism these days? That's our discussion and our debate this hour on It's Your Call. Hello, everyone. It's good to have you with us. I'm Lynn Doyle, and today's topic is a sensitive one. People are always uncomfortable talking about racism, especially if, in some cases, its validity is being questioned. Yet, as you and I both know, it's an important dialogue, especially given recent events. Will people of different skin colors ever be able to look at a situation with the same perspective? Or will race always influence our thinking? Let's pose that very question to our very diverse panel right off the top. It includes some old friends of It's Your Call, including Chad Dion Lassiter, who is an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He teaches courses in American racism. Back with us again is Jeffrey Lord, a contributing editor with the American Spectator. He is a former Reagan White House political director. Also joining us again, an old friend, Tara Dowdell, who is the managing member of the Tara Dowdell Group. She's a former surrogate for President Barack Obama. And rounding out this very diverse panel is a very diverse individual, Tom Atkins. He's the founder of the website commonconservative.com. He's a frequent guest on radio and television talk shows. I believe he got his start here on It's Your Call.
I did.
Great to have everybody here with us for a very important discussion. I want to turn to Chad and Tara first and ask, is it realistic to have a dialogue about race, or is it like our sex? You can't help what color your skin is, so you're always going to look at things because of the color of your skin.
I think it's extremely realistic, particularly so in this era of post-racial society, or what's being articulated as a post-racial society. One of the things I would like to know is, how did we become post-racial? How did we get there? The ascension of Barack Obama as the first African-American president to these United States of America doesn't lend one to think that racism is no longer prevalent in American society. Jim and Jane Crow are still very relevant in today's society.
Do you think, Tara, that individuals of color are experiencing racism on a daily basis today, just like they might have been 20, 30, 50 years ago?
I mean, certainly we've made a great deal of progress. No one can argue with that. But the notion that racism no longer exists, I think, is the wrong notion. I personally have continued to experience it, not to the same extent as I may have 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but it's still something that I have to confront and I have to deal with.
So having said all of that, let's turn to the other side of this panel and say, do you think sometimes in this post-racial society that the so-called race card is played?
It's not played, it's used as a club. And frankly, I'm tired of it. Here's what bothers me. I think white Americans come from being, frankly, in 1950, 1960, for the most part racist, to 1999 and 2000. I mean, for the most part, with some exceptions, certainly, for the most part, they've tried so hard not to be. And I think the sad thing is the original civil rights movement that Martin Luther King really was the king of has become just the opposite. It's become like hate white people. I don't care whether you're watching TV or you're talking to all the black civil rights leaders, all of it's about hating white people.
I had the same kind of incident that Professor Gates had. Everybody involved was white, and the cops made us get out of the car, and like Professor Gates, I was upset. They had me spread-eagled against the car, etc. The message there is, when the cop tells you to do something, do it. I don't care whether you're white, black, or any other color. That's an important thing to understand.
Well, this notion of hate whites is not a notion that I particularly ascribe to, and I don't think most African Americans in the United States really believe that. I think when we're looking at racial profiling, we have 23 states that have racial profiling on the book. If we even look back to the trajectory of looking at racial profiling, it's not something that just typically happens. It's driving while black, shopping while black, studying while black, going to church while black, but it also happens in poor communities. And we have a president or former president like President Bush, who actually talked to his Attorney General, John Ashcroft, to look at racial profiling. So it's something that definitely exists. When we're looking at the Harvard situation with Professor Gates, to me, I don't think that had notions of race in the truest sense. I think that what we're looking at is power and privilege, both for the police officer, who you're going to listen to my authority, Professor Gates, you don't know who I am. I'm the CEO of the Black Intelligentsia. So I think that when we talk, when we're talking about racial profiling, though, it does happen, and I think that the cop on the implicit level might have had some unconscious biases going into that home, knowing that he was going to a home.
I haven't seen any evidence of that in one aspect. Give me one aspect where you think that his bias made him do something.
When the cop was standing there on a porch, he has no idea, which I think is what really irritated Professor Gates. He had absolutely no idea who Professor Gates was. I would have known who Professor Gates was. He didn't know. And he's thinking, I've got a wife, I've got kids, somebody could be here who's going to kill me if I try.
Well, when the gentleman showed his ID, when the gentleman showed his ID in his home.
It was a Harvard ID, though. It was not a license with his address on it.
But it was a Harvard ID with his picture on it and inside his home.
Without his address.
And he also had a cane. Remember, Professor Gates uses a cane, so
right.
he's not an imminent threat to anyone.
Yeah, but you don't know who was in there. The word was that two people were going in there. For all you know, some guy with a shotgun standing at the top of the steps. And everybody here knows that the policeman's most dangerous moment is entering into a house that he's not familiar with.
But the reality, in my earnest opinion, is that what we had here was a masculinity contest. Okay?
I agree.
And someone should have just someone should have just humbled themselves and said, you know what, here's my ID, I need another form of ID. And what Professor Gates could have done is he could have went down to the police station directly the following day and maybe filed a report.
There was more going on here than race.
I think there was, but like
well, testosterone.
If there's a race, but race was definitely a part of this. And to me, the first person who broke that racial barrier was Gates, when he assumed that the policeman must be racist because he is white.
Let's backtrack a little bit. I mean, we all, first of all, I believe, see life through the prism of our experiences.
Agreed.
There's no question about that. Should we endeavor to look beyond that? Absolutely.
Yep.
But you also have to understand, because I've said this before, I can relate to what Professor Gates went through. I can relate to that because there have been times I feel like I've done all the right things. I went to college, I work hard, I try to live a good, decent life and be a good person, do unto others, all those things. And so sometimes it is extremely frustrating when I do those things and then I have to face discrimination solely on the basis of me being black before I even have a chance to open my mouth. And that is my reality. And my problem is the failure to seek to understand my reality. I seek to understand other people's realities.
So
but
how do
I
we
feel like
change
on
it,
the other
Tara?
side, that's not happening.
How do we change it as a society so that you aren't faced with those kinds of judgments until you open your mouth?
Right.
And then if people want
Then
to
if you
say,
don't like me, I get
disagree
it.
with you, right, that's fair
Right,
game,
that's
right?
fair.
How do we change it?
I mean, I think open, candid discussions have to happen. And I mean truly candid discussions, because what happens is people go into these race discussions and everybody's sort of tiptoeing around the elephant in the room, and everybody's afraid
like
of
me.
saying...
Except Tom.
Except for Tom. But Tom, you're the exception. And people are really afraid to say what they're thinking and feeling.
Well,
I used to conduct race relations conferences at my old school, University of Virginia. And I made people put their thoughts and feelings in a hat.
He will do that, though, and be candid about his opinion. And I guarantee you, this show and him personally will get emails calling him the R word.
You know what?
Racist.
First of all, that is exactly what I'm talking about. If you dare to speak up and you're white, you must be a racist.
But Tim,
here are people who are disagreeing with Barack Obama's attempt to take over your health care, and they're being called racist.
But Tim, that's not necessarily true.
Some black people are racist too.
Tim, that's not necessarily true in the sense, because we have white theorists like Tim Wise who speak out about white privilege and white supremacy all the time. I think what has to happen is we have to do the hard work of what we're doing now, is have a national dialogue, and we have to be able to do it with civility, which we're doing here.
Yeah.
I think what oftentimes happens is we understand that white privilege and white supremacy exists, but we also need to teach African Americans how not to buy into their own victimization.
One of the problems we have here,
oh my God, you have hit the nail on the head.
But most black people believe that. Most black people believe that's another misnomer, that we as African Americans don't have self-awareness about some of the issues that we confront as it relates to race. We absolutely do. While you hear Al Sharpton criticizing white people all the time, you go to any black church in America and Al Sharpton is telling black people what they need to be doing
Most
better.
black churches in America.
One of the problems, having worked for a president who was white, presidents get criticized.
Well, all of them were white prior to Barack Obama.
Exactly. Well, exactly. Thank you,
Just
Chad.
happened to be white.
Thank you, Chad. My point.